Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we're bringing you an interview by former advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, Alexey Arestovych, to Yulia Latynina, Russian investigative journalist. They usually meet once a week, and sometimes these streams turn out to be very different from Mark Fagan's. Special thanks go today to our supporters. Thank you, Onru, for joining, and thank you, WBin, for super thanks. And with this, let's go deep dive into day 533 and conversation about the war and ideology. Enjoy. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Yulia Latynina and Arestovych, as very often on Thursdays. Hi, Alexey. Yes, hello, everybody. Do not forget to subscribe to Alexey's channel, which is in the description to the video. Do not forget to subscribe to Yulia's channel as well. And if you're listening or watching that in English and have not subscribed yet, do not forget about Privateer Station as well. And of course, click the like button. Alexey, we've talked a lot of times, and I'm still trying to understand what's happening on the front. And I think I have now two non-mutually exclusive explanations, which are very different from each other. So first one is, although Americans have not granted, actually they both are centered around what do Americans want in this conflict. And it seems to me sometimes that even though they haven't given jets and ATACMS missiles, what they want is full military exhaustion of Russia, so that Putin's Russia would waste as much resources as they can. So after this war, there would be neither army nor even an idea with the Russian elites to try that thing again and to think about new war. Two times a Russian army had already withdrew from Kherson and Kharkov, and what is happening now is grinding down the capabilities of Putin's armies, and also given that Russian command peculiarities when they don't really count the exact number of people in the battalion. So if they have a battalion holding something on paper, they don't care if it's only 30%. So that allows Ukrainian troops to actually grind these 30% down to nothing left. So this is one idea. The fact that they still want to retain Putin in power for a while. It fits in that theory because without Putin, Russia may stop this war immediately. While they need to give that lesson, they want to destroy Hitler basically before starting the Second World War, without starting the Second World War. And they want to grind down Russian capabilities. And the second theory is that United States want Ukraine to sit down and negotiate, and they're slowly leading Ukraine to that by not supplying some of the military nomenclature. So in the first theory, United States do not supply tools that can finish the war faster because they want to exhaust Russian military. And the second, they do not supply them because they want Ukraine to sit down and negotiate. I actually have a third one, Julia, and the thing is that one needs to sit down and push the negotiations both sides, Russia and Ukraine, and Russia doesn't want to sit down. If you remember, last phase of negotiations push happened in autumn last year, right? When we took Kherson, Russia withdrew, and then there was a tactical pause in supplies. Our allies, for some reason, slowed down everything, and there was a lot of rhetoric about the need to negotiate. And then later, when Putin announced next mobilization and started his hits on our energy infrastructure, and then also wrote down Zaporozhye, Kherson, and the others as territories of Russia, then the West, in my opinion, considered him to be unnegotiable, clinically insane, and they started to pump more military resources into Ukraine. I remind you that tank coalition was being discussed for 11 months. Collective West was not sure if they can supply metal boxes on tracks that can go somewhere and shoot something. They needed to discuss it for 11 months about that escalation. So Americans have a certain peg on the scale, they're looking, I think, if he's going into this winter campaign, because in Kremlin they're already talking about mobilization, so I think this will probably happen. And I think we're expecting another 300 to 500,000 more mobilized troops, because Kremlin still doesn't want to do any peace negotiations. Maybe they want to do that for a brief capability to finish mobilization, so they can finish that process, maybe sit down and slow things down. But that's the only reason for them to sit down. Otherwise, they don't want to. And I think Americans are looking at these perspectives and saying that if Moscow will misbehave, they'll increase more arms supplies to Ukraine. And if Ukraine will misbehave, they will decrease arms supply. And hoping that somewhere in the middle, we might negotiate. And this is the war for exhaustion for both sides, Russia and Ukraine. And it's the war to exhaust Russia by means of Ukraine. Yes, Julia, that's what it looks like. By the way, speaking of Putin continuing war in winter, I keep hearing that he is purchasing a gigantic number of UAVs. It even becomes difficult to buy UAVs in China because Putin is buying most of the available stock on the market. That's what Yulia Latynina told me yesterday. It's difficult for me to gauge the expertise of Yulia Latynina in this question, but let's consider that Russia indeed put in a lot of resources into development of small unmanned aerial vehicle aviation, starting with intel drones and finishing with big, heavy birds that can drop munitions. And we understand their game here. They have hundreds, thousands of mobilized, a lot of people. They have a lot of drones. And with select groups of a brigade or detachment size that can perhaps be equipped with some armor that can be restored from storage and retrofitted with whatever modern things are available, and can be used in some parts of the front. So in general, this leads them to the concept that they know works: big masses of infantry, a lot of drones that can destroy and can take care of our equipment, and put us in a condition when we would be losing just by sheer numbers, and our equipment would be shot down by drones. And of course, keep destroying our infrastructure and shooting us up with missiles. And that's their concept of how they think they can win this war. So speaking of infrastructure, last winter you guys survived, even despite their attacks on your energy system. What about this coming one? Yulia, infrastructure is different. They destroyed our infrastructure that was capable of doing grain deliveries in the ports, and that was very sensitive. I'm not going to go into details, but there are other elements of infrastructure that they can be targeting. I do not believe about peace in October, November, but I know that we will be pushed to negotiate in these months by results of counteroffensive. But I don't see Putin agreeing to that negotiation. I also do not see that, Alexey, right, because why he needs it? It's reparations, it's responsibility for this war. As long as he can keep pulling this song and this event, he probably will stick to doing it. Yeah, I agree with you there. Well, the only thing I see, he might continue the war. He doesn't even need to attack, right? Indeed, he doesn't need to keep attacking. He can just dig deeper and just hold there. And they think, looking at the south, they can see that in the south it's difficult for us to advance because they have dug in and they're trying to hold it now. And they're trying to push some war, some active attack on the northeast. And that's where they're testing different approaches. They found their formula of war: big masses of people, a lot of drones that destroy our equipment, and also dig where you cannot go into offensive and push some attacks where you can. And they can also create a ton of problems to NATO in Africa and on the border with Poland and Lithuania. That works for them. Does it really work though? Because I have an impression that under some circumstance their front can be broken through and their reserves are running out. Well, yeah, the question here is a little different, right? I can give 99% that we will break through to the seas in the south. I'll give you 99%, I'll retain one for some black swan event, but we'll get to the seas there. They will lose Zaporozhye and Kherson. They will still have Crimea, Donbass, and Lugansk in this scenario. And then before we capture anything else, before we liberate our territories from their annexation, they can bring 300 to 500,000 people. And it's cities in Crimea, towns in Crimea, and it's also a lot of forests in the northeast, like in Lugansk. It'll be difficult for us to keep waging a war and keep fighting through under these conditions. And when we get tired, they can try to do some counteroffensive on their side, and they'll try to solve their old task of getting to the borders of Lugansk and Donetsk regions. And Crimea is still a big question if we can liberate that in a rapid fashion. Okay, let's change topic. Today, Volosh, the former owner of Yandex, Russian equivalent of Google, after he sold his network and left Russia, he is now opening his mouth to condemn war. But it causes me to smile because the head of foreign trade bank, Kostin, in Russia, just a couple months ago said that we shouldn't be paying for that. We should just expropriate that from the owner and have it. So I think what happened there, Volosh didn't get what he was hoping to get monetarily for that. And when he understood that he was basically dumped from that deal and he received only partial compensation, he started to talk up about war and might even go and sue Russia for the money that he was supposed to get from the sale. So my question is about Russian businessmen, oligarchs, who on one hand are hostages to Putin's regime. And Volosh is probably a little different because he was active participant in a lot of tracking and IT tracing efforts by FSB for Russian to trace Russian citizens in opposition. So he's probably a little different. But how do you treat others? I don't know. I don't know, Yulia, who even asked him. Oh, he was saying that he was saying all these things to get rid of Western sanctions because they are on his name as well. Okay. So the thing is, Yandex is actually very well integrated with Ukrainian communications too. Before the war, it was. We had antivirus from Kaspersky in Ukraine, even on military fabrication plants, and we also had mail.ru, and Yandex, of course, was using. And I had people telling me that some of these systems, even accounting system, OneS accounting, and some others, were basically collecting data and sending it to Russia before war, till the 24th of February last year. So 2/3 of our companies were on Russian software. And this was given as packages on the market. This was always sold together. There was Kaspersky antivirus, OneS accounting system, Mail.ru for mail services, and Yandex as a search engine and integrator. So all that triad and quartet were delivering data to FSB and to Moscow, brushed up and sliced in any way they want. So I'll let them figure out between themselves who owes money to whom. But as for the other Russian businessmen, I think it's probably deserving a separate review in each separate case. Because you cannot just gather everyone on some formal attribute, and life is more complex than that. So you need to be more of a surgeon rather than the carpet bombing in this case. It's nice to hear that, Alexey, because I remember Michael McFaul saying, let's sanction everybody who was paying taxes in Russia. I almost bit my tongue there because I wanted to say, let's also get those who offered Putin a restart after his operation in Georgia. Mr. McFall, and I think it was you who did that. Yeah, you can discuss angles of it, and one needs to think, Yulia, here the strategic way of where we're leading Russia, right? Because if our goal is to destroy Russia as the economic subject, that's probably an approach to do. But if it doesn't exist, then we probably shouldn't be doing these sanctions in that fashion. Those who can, probably, they're still, I don't see them posting such goal. In my opinion, Alexey, if you blanketly accuse all oligarchs, it just keeps them all hostages. And if you basically attack everybody who were paying taxes in Russia, you might also attack Ukrainian oligarchs who are paying taxes in Russia, who were paying before the war. Right, and you can also connect those who are still trading with Russia. There are companies in the United States who are that are still trading with Russia. So there are a lot of people in Europe too who are still trading, maybe not military items, but it's a complex topic. Everybody has their own opinion, but one would probably need to look at the general goal. What do we want from Russia? To get rid of Putin and to make sure Russia is a normal, doesn't even have to be a democratic, but at least reasonable government, reasonable country that understands that doing territorial wars in the 21st century is unprofitable and they shouldn't be doing it. Everything else, do as you like. Then I would put a second question. How imposing sanctions on everybody who are paying taxes in Russia, how does it help to Putin's fall? It's a non-linear question, right? But generally generating ideas is not too difficult, but one needs to follow through with strategic approach. So, speaking of those who are trading with Russia, I think we also saw in the news that there was a Ukrainian titanium manufacturer, right, that also got there because they were selling titanium to Russia. Well, not exactly. They were selling to European counterparts, which apparently was discovered were set up by Russia to buy that commodity and transport it back to Russia to be used in missiles. Yeah, we discussed that with Romanenko. This is the situation of a lot of gray schemas, and life is richer than a lot of fantasies. So, what do you think about that? I think in real open economy, it's very difficult to stop these trade actions. You can't really stop that siphon and stop all the transactions from happening. Well, indeed, but probably situations like military-grade metals and technologies should be monitored, should be not given to an aggressor. But I always like to ask a question. To do what? What do we want? And measure all our actions with that question. For example, let's ask a question in the planning horizon of, let's say, 5 years. How do we want to remove Putin? What is his power standing on? Because to remove him, you need to remove his source of power, right? Or stifle it somehow. Let's describe the model. What is he standing on? Probably on the capability to use enforcement and to kill or destroy anybody who is against him. Partially, yes. But he also has a degree of legitimization in the country. He actually has a certain portion of Russian citizens that believe him, who still think that war and Putin is the best solution right now. Part of enforcement directors, enforcement agencies, they know that their current life is better under Putin than if somebody else comes and the war stops. On money, right? The next pillar for Putin's regime is money. He needs a way to uphold the regions that are in debt. Maybe also on the idea of Russia being some sort of superpower that is being afraid of by the rest of the world. On some historic mission, on some orthodoxy, Orthodox Christianity. And this is a complex set of pillars, right? So What was done during the 18 months of this war by us or by West to destroy at least one of these pillars? Well, when Russian artillery gets hit by HIMARS missile, that's always good. But what was done to take the power away from Putin? Me personally, I tried, and I keep trying. Even though to a lesser degree now, I was always separating Russians from Putin, because that's one of the main things that you need to do in this war. Biden in Warsaw also mentioned that he does separate Russians from Putin. Putin was given an order for kidnapping, right? So that's a personal attack on him. But I don't see more efforts, more concerted efforts directed at that. All right, if we're looking from this angle, I also want to ask two more questions that keep surprising me since the beginning of war. First is about people who were conscribed in Donbas region. They're actually technically Ukrainian citizens that are being kept hostages. Yeah, I understand some of them may be brainwashed by propaganda, others are probably forced to fight. But we know pretty well, by the way, blogger Yan Gulbaev, who was calling all the mobilized with a lot of expletives, suddenly wrote that his friends and relatives were mobilized and they don't want to be mobilized. They don't want to fight this war. So he was attacking everybody who was fighting the war before that, and now when his relatives are being brushed up into this fight, he's apparently starting to apologize and see the grades of shade. So where am I leading to with this? These mobilized troops that were thrown onto the front line as the meat in Donetsk part of the front, in Bakhmut and other places. Why Ukrainian government did not send a mass appeal to these mobilized to surrender? Because many of them might have been considered themselves to be hostages and would try to surrender if they could. I have only one answer to that, Yulia. I am not a Ukrainian leadership. If I was orchestrating this war, this resistance on our side, I would have done it differently, everything. But I am not in charge. And if you were, how would you do that? Well, first of all, let's talk about the obvious. It is very obvious that we would not allow to create an image of orc from typical Russian, because it motivates them to fight. When you completely dehumanize the opponent, remember when we were just beginning this war, or at the first months, what was our advantage? It was in justice, because we were attacked. And we not only were attacked, we behaved as European nation. We tried to be gallant to our enemies. We tried to not demonize them to the level of dog pigs and the rest, and orcs. Then later we got different moods in the society prevailing, and it became obvious that Ukrainian collective society thinks of average Russian as the pig dog, a bad animal, a fictitious bad animal that you cannot expect anything good from. And that includes all the Russian intellectuals, all these Fagins, Latyninas, and Nevzorovs. They're also assholes. They just managed to learn French and a couple other things back in the day, by mistake. What would be Russian citizen reaction to that, when you are being added to the cohorts of pig dogs? Yeah, you can't really leave that, right? Yeah, regardless, even if you don't like Putin. I can answer that. Actually, it reminds me what's happening in the internet. It's similar to in Volinsky killings. I will quote Timothy Snyder here. What was the main there? The main was not to just kill the Pole back in the day, the message on the Ukrainian side, But the fact that the Poles will come to avenge the dead, and people in Ukraine needed to self-identify to be either with Ukraine or with Poland. They did not have a choice to sit it out, or did not have a choice to stay human. So in the internet, that's minus the killings, but that's what's happening. Yeah, I think the main mistake that Ukraine did so far was to dehumanize Russian people. We were holding initially, but then we plunged in with joy. Well, not all, right? Not all, that's true. But that did leak into the internet, and into the interwebs, where people are attacking an average Russian 7 ways to Sunday. And we gave to those who are mobilized for the Russian army a great motivation to fight. They always now have a way to explain what are they fighting for. We gave them a reason for resentment. We gave them a reason for revenge. I'm being considered an animal, my wife is being considered an animal, my parents are animals, everybody thinks we're slaves and animals, maniacs and psychos. So, yeah, here we are. What can we do with you? We'll just fight you. And instead, we should have used tools to separate Putin and his regime from an average Russian citizen. And we needed to show very effectively how Jews did during the war with Arabs. Fighting for their independence, they said that Arab people are not our enemies. Israelis are eager to shake hands with any Arab right now. Our enemies are some chauvinistic leadership and governments of some countries, of some Arab countries around us. And that was the message. That's what we should have done all the time, at the minimum. And that's given that Arabs back in 1948 were not humanistic to Jews, to say the least. And their goals were stated pretty bluntly at that time. They wanted to, if you bring up some documents, they basically wanted to repeat Holocaust. If Putin at least initially said in his statements that he'll destroy Kiev regime, Arabs back then, they were just attacking the whole population and the country of Israel. So I think this is one of the ideological mistakes we made. I'm always thinking, how do Russian Voluntary Corps and Legion of Freedom of Russia, how are they listening to all that? That Russians are slaves, genetic idiots, and animals, while they're fighting on our side on the front. And I was always asking these hot shots Ukrainians, the ones who are posting all that. I was asking them, okay, so you're sitting here and doing nothing and posting that crap online, and he's actually going into the Russian territory, killing Putin's enforcers. Who is the big dog here? So, since we're touching upon this difficult topic, I will ask 2 more difficult questions. One is, and it's understandable how Russians treat that question, even though some write it down that obvious, when people are being hurt, they scream. And I, frankly, don't care, don't pay much attention to what people are saying on the web and people who are on the front, because on the internet there are trolls on the front, everything is black and white, right? So if somebody is sitting on the sofa and writing nastygrams on the internet, he's been a troll all his life, and now he just has a way to legitimize the hate. So shouldn't be paying attention to these figures as well. So I cannot really have any qualms with those who are suffering under Russian missiles, and those who just hate because they like to hate. They don't deserve attention. But there is a category of people which I thought is always important in that situation. It is West. Because in this war, we're talking about whether to return Crimea or not, whether to give Ukraine the weapons so they can come back to the territorial integrity of 1991 or not. And then we see Burns, who is one way or another is seeking for peace to happen. And he's watching something online, and not just something, but the head of Ukrainian national security, Danilko, and bringing that to Biden, who's saying that, who's making pretty chauvinistic statements. So he brings that to Biden and says, Biden, if we give them our weapons, if these people take power, what will it lead to? Do you think it also can be a demotivator for the United States to participate actively? That stories and that chauvinistic angle doesn't really help with bringing West closer to delivering more arms and wider nomenclature. We can talk a lot about what Russia was doing in Donbass. It was not exactly an ethnic cleansing, but there was a lot of terrorism, basically, and millions of people who could not stand that had to flee to Ukraine. And the West didn't do that. But if Ukraine will come there, and Burns may point to that video of Danilov, what will happen? All right. I have a little different logic here, Yulia. Even regarding trolls, the funnies on the web, and regarding Biden and Burns and ideology and everything. My ideology is simple. To do what? What are our goals? And that puts everything in the very clear light. On any front, ideological, economic, whatever. What are the formal goals of this war? The borders of 1991? Okay. Alone, we cannot get there. Under current equipment, we also cannot get there. I'll just put that as a fact. It can be a good plank, a good milestone to reach to, but in our current economy, in our current situation with Western help, we very unlikely will reach these exact borders. What if the volume of support grows? Oh yeah, then we can, but it needs to be times bigger and more effective. Right, but to get it, one needs maybe to behave differently, right? No, I don't think Americans are not giving us certain nomenclature because they're calculating the chauvinism and some statements of some people. They probably calculate that, but I don't think that's the main factor. Given that we have not been torturing people of Donbass or anything like Russians did, but we probably should be not giving them additional facts to that, right? Right. I actually will say that one of the mistakes of current government is that they are kind of quietly supportive of these statements in Ukraine. And the problem is that Russian imperialism is the twin brother of Ukrainian nationalism. They're like twins. Which ones? The ones that are connected with one body. Oh, Siamese twins. Right. And they're using the same tool sets, the same picture of the world, the same vocabulary, despite the difference in languages, same ideology. They cannot exist one without another. Back in there were times when they were separate entities. For example, Ukrainian nationalism could be directed against Poles. And now they're very intertwined with Russian imperialism, so they found each other. And in a wide sense, it's directed only against Russian imperialism. So if Russian imperialism disappears, Ukrainian nationalism doesn't make sense. There are no enemies in Kremlin. But who gave it the main voice in the public messaging since probably about July of last year? Where was our government looking? Why did they allow for that to fester? I think it's one of the main stupid actions that we did. Because Americans can see that too. If the dominating ideology that representatives of the highest leadership in the country allow themselves to talk about, what exactly are we building with American arms here? Another Hungary? At best. I mean, Orban Hungary. Or are they building some open liberal society that looks more like America? So whatever we are talking about here internally is very different from liberal society and American standards. But it looks much closer that it can at some point become some sort of chauvinistic, maybe nationalist society. And the West can consider a lot of questions. Do they need a country like that in that place as a member of NATO, as a member of European Union? So that discussion is ongoing, and I'm participating in that actively. Right, we're being bold here, we're exaggerating a little, but in general, yeah, this discussion exists. Americans are asking a lot of questions. That's just taking ideology, not even taking corruption, ineffectivity in economy. Let's explore the ideological branch of thinking. We've done a lot of stupid things in this regard. Barbarians, what can you do here? Then, Alexey, I will chime in here, because I think that's exactly what Putin wanted to achieve. I think that is a mistake that we fell for it. Because right after Bucha, we discussed that. What is the goal? What is the purpose of Bucha? Twofold. One is to terrorize Ukrainian citizens, because Putin is cosplaying Stalin and thinks terror is effective. And it was effective back in the 40s in Ukraine under Stalin. And second is to cause a likewise reaction, and then point at that and say, see, this is the war of hate. Yeah, Putin did everything to dehumanize us, and we did everything to dehumanize ourselves. We can pose a question whether Putin achieved his goal. Was it exact result of his actions? But the fact that we did everything to reach that, we did. That's true, yeah. Well, there is still a fact that we're still talking, that we are present on the Ukrainian media. So this is an indicator that Putin didn't achieve everything he wanted to, right? Correct, but he did achieve a lot. More than that, I will add one other thing, that not everybody understood his last speech, where he talked about Poland this, Poland that, and people were laughing about the old grandpa having illusions. Me, when I listened to that speech, I saw another mirror of Bucha in that speech, only not with real dead bodies, but more like an interweb Bucha, when Putin is trying to awaken all possible worst feelings and hate, and not only in Ukraine, but in all the surrounding countries. And let's do something, let's attack Ukraine or something. That's what Hitler used to do. Remember when he was cutting and dismembering Czechoslovakia, he also wanted Poland to grab a bite of it. And he was happy that some countries went for it and did dig into the body of other countries being dismembered. So Putin would love Europe to forget about what they are and to remember national borders and start pointing old columns and issues. When Hungary would come and say Zakarpattia is ours, Poland will come with territorial accusations and grabs, and everybody will go fighting for their own things. And, well, yeah, Europe is not falling for that, but Europe is not fighting as well. Yeah, Europe is living a different life. It's very far for them, and Putin also provides certain inputs, so they have other worries, electricity, prices, and all, so that the war would remain a fight of two barbarians, so that Europe would not need to help in this war. Barbarians may be fighting somewhere on the outskirts, and Europeans will be enjoying coffee somewhere in Paris. I would say that from the side of Ukraine, one would need to conduct this war more effectively. I'll draw you a picture to not talk too much. We're I'll give you an image. We're like fighting in a brawl in a village, where two guys are just hitting each other, remembering all issues, whose cow went where, who's getting fruit from whose tree, what happens with families, and they're just going away swinging at each other. While instead we should have been surgeons. We should have been very particular, not even attacking at any time Russian people in general, but very surgically defining certain personalities and attacking them. And that's when we could demonstrate a different thing, that we're a different civilization that is conducting war by different means and different styles. We're doing at least two levels higher war than Russia is doing. That would have been a true Western approach and a good sense of it. Because one can compare how Soviet Union fought in Afghanistan and how the West was fighting in Afghanistan. Both lost, of course, at the end, but there was a big difference. In the Soviet times, if there is a shot from a village on a Russian column, then first of all, the strategic bombers, led by Dadaev, were dropping bombs. Then Su-24s were sending missiles, then artillery shelled them, then a couple ballistic missiles, then more artillery, then tanks, then some napalm, and then after that some infantry could come in and maybe finish if there was anybody still moving there. West did differently. They drew a scheme, a leadership of a certain gang, a Talib group. They were drawing all the economic connections and other connections between the members. They found the commander, they found the most key person in the group, and they would assassinate that person. Then Taliban would put another leader, and he would be gone as well. So the average lifespan of a Taliban leader in Afghanistan was about 3 months. Then they would destroy economic connection for that group. Some supply lines would be interrupted. Then they would make sure two groups would start infighting. So Taliban branches would start fighting between each other. So for 2 months, terror goes down. And in the meantime, they managed to create another block post or build another aqueduct to the village. So that's how the West was fighting, more effectively, and they waged it for a longer time. Overall general goals initially were wrong, but that's another matter, another question. So we should have been doing a surgical warfare on all the fronts, moral, economy, sanctions, everything. But there's an old saying of Marine, I think American Marines are celebrating their birthday this week. And that saying goes as, in the moment of real trials, you will not elevate to the level of your aspirations, but you'll fall down to the level of your training. And we fell to the level of our training, the whole society. And those people that are leading the society, how did they behave? Because the demand, the ask from them is higher, right? Is taller. How did they behave? Because an average Ukrainian leader, person, a blogger, somebody who is in attention, I asked a few of them, why are you posting that? Why so much hate? And very often I got an answer that, well, that's what my subscribers like, even though I do not agree with it. Yeah, that's the difference between, Alexey, between a politician and a government leader and a strategic government leader. Politician wants to be liked by voters, and the government leader, the country leader, wants to implement strategic goals. A very good estimate to that, a mark to that, was given by Cardinal Lubomir Gudsev, who is not to be suspected as FSB agent at all. He said that our problem is amorality, we're immoral. And then Arestovych came and deepened that and said that it's only part of it. We are immoral, but then we're also coming out and saying that we're the coolest, toughest, bestest nation, the most advanced, the most spiritual, and everybody around us are not worthy. From Americans to quoting pig dogs in Russia. So the problem is only getting deeper. Yefremov called it inferno, when you're flying into the funnel, and every action that you can take will only worsen it. Here I have another remark, Alexey. On one hand, I'm remembering how Israel is fighting against Hamas, and Israel, regardless that in one of the well-known book, it's written, an eye for an eye, a life for life. They are not following that principle. And that's what allows this war to this conflict, if the conflict between Israel and Hamas would go into the plane where everybody hates everybody and everybody would treat each other as enemies, then Israel would have lost all support of the West, including United States and everybody else, and all that would be going as Iran-Iraq conflict. Because despite of all the lefts that are screaming about the rights of Palestinians, that position of Israel, when they're not destroying the whole blocks, the whole city blocks as a response, when Palestinian kids, if anything happens, are being treated in Israel, that moral position allows Israel to exist there. This is a strategic marker they keep themselves up to. Without it, they probably will not survive. You know, when I first visited Israel and I looked at their military in Hebron and other places, I didn't even understand how can they survive. Because an average Israeli conscript fighter is a very interesting creature, probably partly due to national peculiarities of character. They're more active than they're more emotional than thinking. So, to give you an example, there is a position where Israeli soldiers stay, and there is a net, a masking net from snipers, because there are no snipers working in that area. And this net is there, but there is like a 2-yard gap in the middle as he walks to his position. So I come to him and say, hey, why don't you cover that? And he's answering, no, there is, where do I take extra net? We don't have that. I showed him there was extra, just use half an hour with the hammer and you fold it this way and you cover it and then you're better protected. And he just shrugged it off and said, nah, it's okay, I'll just walk. I don't know how they survived. At that moment I was surprised, because one could catch them as butterflies. You know, those 18, 19-year-olds who are holding these positions. And then I understood later, when I got acquainted closer with Israel, as Israeli psychologists, professional psychologists told me later, they have an interesting feature in their nation. After roughly about 45 years old, their men go through hormonal changes, and instead of excitement and some degree of hysteria being present in the youth, which often allows them to go from cry to laughter, which is a very difficult quality to base your war, fighting the war on, or have that in your war fighters. By 45, they become very cold, and they often become those people who are as cold as Arctic wind in glasses, who are sitting and calculating everything. And these are the ones who are running their special services, and often sciences as well, and politics. And just a little bit of these people in the right positions is enough to hold that nation. So a small percent of surgeons who can calculate, who can sit down and calculate all details, from ideology to expenses to military doctrines to everything. And these are the ones that, in my opinion, are pulling the country through. We don't have these. We have a few, but they're not institutionalized. They don't have enough power, and they're not in the right positions to change our strategy. I'm not even talking about them affecting government, right? Not even talking about society. Just to affect government, they're not there. And each country has its own average image, right? You can remember Simpsons. That's average American. Average American is average Earthling is a barbarian, one way or another. And it always comes back to these few surgeons, that small percent of people who can calculate, who can strategize. Okay, so I have two thoughts here. One brings me back to Putin and the way he wages wars. There is a heroic way to wage war, when you treat your enemy as an honorable enemy and somebody deserving your respect. And then there is a non-knightly way of doing it, when you do not see your enemy as a human. Putin started to go down first. He did not only respect his enemies, he actually arrested and court-martialed people who were fighting in the enemy's army against him, even though they were fighting for their own land. And the proper knighthood way of fighting the war required reciprocity. So if there was a knight who was not following these rules, he eventually was captured and hung somewhere, and everybody would forget about him. That's one. The second is, speaking of leaders, I'm looking with some sadness not only on the modern society, but on certain human groups within flourishing planet Earth. So you remember Taliban, right? Back in the day, I did mention in some other streams about how they appeared. I was surprised when I dug deeper, because they were different from Mujahideen. Mujahideen were rooted in the village. Each of them knew 100 relatives. He's got 500 friends. He's always calculating his social behavior, because in the village there are certain traditions and people don't like others who stick out too much here and there. Whilst Taliban were kids who grew up on free food in refugee camps. Food was provided by the West. They did not have anything uniting them except for Imam in their religious school told them that they need to kill the unfaithful. And we see a lot of communities now popping up in different countries, organized by the same principle. And I think what's happening in American inner cities often is the same concept. What's happening in Russian army, same concept. What's happening in Twitter, same concept as well. Because in Twitter, they don't really feel any social responsibility. But if there is a magnet or some light that appeals to them, they all of a sudden pile up into that direction. Just like, let's say, another crowd that went to rob Nike store in the United States. So, do you think how people behave themselves in social media and in reality, it used to be different. In social media, they often come to express their hate, and when all of a sudden he sees that he can channel his hate, and he can also say that I'm not just hating because I like to hate, but I found some reason to implement my hate against. Yulia, let's post a question to the averages, to ours and to yours. If there are two villages fighting, right? Let's say a visiting lecturer is posing a question. I'm addressing it to the ones who are watching us. Not all of them are village, but just in general. Yeah, our viewers are probably not the village exactly, but let's post the question here. I am reading some commentary that they're posting. I see that there is enough averagism there too. So then a question to that and to the city intelligence. Do you agree with the statement that the main logic of American foreign policy is a triangle: Beijing, Moscow, Washington, and the task is always the same: Washington with Beijing against Moscow, or Washington with Moscow against Beijing? Ask this question and see, do you agree with that? Another question, do you agree with the statement that there'll be a big fight with China in Asia, for Taiwan or not, military or economic, and Americans are preparing for that? And now imagine if Americans manage to sway Moscow to their side against Beijing, which is, by the way, a goal of American politics and at present. And that logic explains what's happening with our military supplies, etc. Do you realize that the moment Moscow and Washington align against China, Russia and Ukraine become allies too, against China? This is the officially stated one of the goals of American politics. They're not saying that Ukraine and Russia need to become allies, but they're talking about the triangle. That they're pulling everybody to their side to fight against China. And then, hello, right? 4 simple steps. And you have to answer very uncomfortable questions. The chain of thought that lasts maybe 30 seconds, and if you're thinking about it, it's usually faster. So now let's make a statement of an official position of Ukraine. Dear Ukrainian eagles who are commenting us here, great geopoliticians who are accusing Latynina and Arestovych for conducting joint streams, will you stand in the same trench, shoulder to shoulder with the Russian soldier against China? How would you be helping United States in their struggle against China? And what will you tell America if they ask you to join? That you are not like that? That you will not do it? Do you see that if you do not want to be part of that group, if you want to have some basis to reject that request, you need to prepare for that. You need to have some sovereignty, economic sovereignty, to depend less on the Europe and the United States while still remaining an ally, and to sit there with a calculator and calculate all the facets of your agreements with America, instead of jumping with big hugs and screaming, we need more ATACMS. That life doesn't end tomorrow. It won't end even with us taking back Crimea or getting back to the borders of 1991. That good politician needs to calculate 50 years ahead. That the real political process and sovereignty is defined by strategic planning. 10 years is not strategic. 30, that's where it starts. While an average citizen, might have enough brains to be happy about a shark biting Russian in Egypt, but to calculate, 5 or 10 years outward, it makes it more difficult. Right, Alexey, but we shouldn't brush everybody with the same brush. Same thing, right? You shouldn't be saying that all Russians are alike. Exactly, I agree. We're all a bit different. I'm Ukrainian sitting here talking with you. I also have a lot of good friends who disagree with a lot of official things here happening and societal things happening. We're talking often at Alpha and Omega channel. But the overall societal vector is directed where? We can't even see our nose, and we can't even calculate simple two-step operation. And by the way, neither Putin's, nor Americans, nor Europeans, we can't calculate that. But we're full with righteous hatred, and never ever again, in no way, and everybody like one will stand up and will prohibit and will not let. And what if you turn your brain on and calculate things a little? That's it. That is a very simple task. Probably first year in big geopolitics. That's what I brought here. Just to think a little. All right, Alexey, I think it was a fascinating stream. Yulia, with your prayers, right. I, by the way, had another quote. Can I finish this stream with this quote? Perhaps you can comment on that. On the last stream, you recommended to read a story by Alexander Beck, Volokholamskaya Highway, about a Kazakh military leader who was absolutely genius, and I was thinking, where would he be if he was not growing in a big country, because he was really growing up in a small village. And I'll probably get answers here that then Kazakhstan would not have issues with hunger and communism. But then this guy would probably not have a chance to become a good commander, absolutely genius commander. But there are other books among them that this author wrote, and one of them is interesting book that talks about Russians in Kazakhstan, and I'm quoting here. So, Russian in Kazakhstan, after walking 10 steps, stopped and told to his older son, I apologize for my accent.
Аж можна хребет переламать. Сейчас, батько, сейчас нарадимо, як бритва буде. Робі, синок, робі гарно, бормотал старик ласково.
Father is basically addressing his son how to properly prepare sickle for harvest, and it was in Ukrainian. So that's how Russians were in Kazakhstan back then. Oh yeah, Yulia, who paid attention? Which Russians are there? But what I'm saying is, let's think and calculate. That's what I'm appealing to. Let me quote Vaskov, the leader from one of the movies about the Dawns Are Quiet, who managed to stop a German diversion group in that movie with several girls who barely knew how to shoot. And his statement was, war is not about who shoots more, war about who thinks more. The one who think better usually win war. Those who fall into anti-culture and anti-thinking, these are the ones who lose wars. If you don't want to lose war, you need to learn how to think and keep doing it. Oh yeah, that's what I'm calling secondary barbarization, when people become simpler after losing a lot of societal connections and replacing them with slogans. Yep, just think, and one needs to also allow themselves to think on the topics that you absolutely do not want to think about, because you might have some emotional traumas, etc. Well, you will lose with your emotional traumas. You'll be just dispersed in history at the end of it, and you will not be even a blip with your emotional things. Alexey, I appreciate your fantastic stream. I hope you will not be eaten alive after that. I frankly do not give a damn, Yulia. Who? By whom? Hey, devourers, where are you? Devourers! Alright, on this, let's conclude here, and I hope that I'll see you again. It was Yulia Latynina, Alexey Arestovych. But, by the way, did you like these Russians in Kazakhstan? Oh,
Да.
absolutely.
Коли каже дід старий, каже своєму внуку, що давай, працюй гарно, це дуже добре росіяни. Правильно.
These were really good Russians, indeed.
Это была Юлия Латынина.
This was Yulia Latynina and Alexey Arestovych.
Спасибо, Алексей.
Спасибо нашим зрителям.
Thank you, our viewers.